Welcome to this week's online study. If this is your first time, welcome. If you were here last week, welcome back. And in either case, I hope you will share generously your comments about what we're doing here so that it is as meaningful and useful as it can be for what it is. And remember that this is intended to be a study in conversation with at least two people. The gospel for October 5 is a continuation of the contentious conversation that Jesus is having with his opponents, the religious leaders
Matthew
of the day.
21, verses 33 to 46. Jesus said, "Listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a watchtower. Then he leased it to tenants and went to another country. When the harvest time had come, he sent his slaves to the tenants to collect his produce. But the tenants seized his slaves and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. Again, he sent other slaves, more than the first, and they treated them in the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, 'They will respect my son.' But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and get his inheritance.' So they seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. Now, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants?" They said to him, "He will put those wretches to a miserable death and lease the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the harvest time." Jesus said to them, "Have you never read in the Scriptures, 'The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone'? This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people that produces the fruits of the kingdom. The one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls." When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they realized that he was speaking about them. They wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowds, because they regarded him as a prophet.
Okay, that's our passage for this week. If you'd like to read it in a different translation, I'll stop talking, you hit pause, and we'll get back together in just a bit. One more time out if you want it. Hit pause again if you need a little time to reflect on what you've just heard, or to write down some notes or some questions. I'll be back in a moment.
First, a quick word about parables. The word parable is made from two Greek words, para, alongside, and bole, to throw. A parable throws something familiar alongside something unfamiliar, so that the something about the familiar might shed new light on the unfamiliar. Also, this parable is an echo of an allegory found in Isaiah chapter 5. I'll give you a quick summary, but feel free to pause me for a moment if you want to read it yourself. In that chapter, God plants a vineyard, in other words, a nation, and expects that nation to produce good fruit, but it does not. So the vineyard is destroyed. And there you have a quick history of God's people in the Hebrew Bible. First the northern kingdom, and then the southern kingdom are judged for failing to keep the covenant. I think Jesus wants to call this ancient story to mind as he reinterprets it about himself.
Anyone who knows the Jesus story at all can see in this parable that he tells a foretelling of his own life story. And as I reread the parable, I was struck again by the ignorance. I wanted to say stupidity, but I get called out every time I use the word stupid by the children who've learned not to use that word. But the ignorance of those who thought if they killed the son, they would get his inheritance. I guess that's as ignorant as those who think that by trying to rid themselves of God's Son in their life and his influence, they can go about their own lives any way they choose. So let's take a closer look at the conversation into which Jesus invites his hearers. After telling the story, in verse 40, Jesus asks, "Now when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants?" Listen again to the answer they give. "He will put those wretches to a miserable death and lease the vineyard to other tenants who will give him his produce at the harvest time." I wish I had been there with a video camera, or at least a still camera, to see Jesus' reaction and his face when they gave that answer. So pause the video for a few moments, look at the pictures I've provided, and talk together about the question that I've given you. Jesus' answer is not nearly so harsh as the one that was given in verse 41. He basically says, hey, let's read the Bible together, shall we? And then he basically equates the respected and then killed son with the stone that is rejected by builders as being suitable for use as a cornerstone.
When you hear that word cornerstone, do not think of the decorative and commemorative cornerstones that are found in many churches and other public buildings. Back in the day, the cornerstone was the first foundation stone that was placed, and against it and on top of it, all other stones in the building were held in place and in proper alignment.
Speaking of the cornerstone in this more ancient way, let me invite you to pause the video again in a moment to talk about cornerstones in your own life. Here at Mount Cross, we list our core values in the worship folder every week, and in other places too. And you could say that these are our cornerstone beliefs. So what would you identify as your own core values, the cornerstones that hold your life and your faith together? I'll be here when you get back. The passage nears its conclusion with a verse that is very tough to interpret there in verse 44. "The one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls." I welcome your comments and your insights as to how this passage might be interpreted. It's a reminder to me of the way that before it can be good news, the good news has to be bad news in a way. If someone believes they are full or complete or satisfied or in absolute control of their lives, then they're trying to be their own guide. They're trying to be their own shepherd. They're trying to live according to their own will and not God's will. They don't appear to have any room left for God in their life. That person may have to be broken first so they can see the gracious offer of the Good Shepherd. I'm reminded of what Pastor Eric had in his sermon just on last Sunday when he talked about how sometimes we need to be broken. The Greek word here for stumbling block is scandalon. You hear the word scandal in it. The gospel has to scandalize us and make us aware of our need so that God can be ready to fill that need.
Thinking about your need to be broken before you can really hear the good news opens the door to something for which you might pray this week and a concern or confession you might bring to worship. What are those places in your life that need breaking? In other words, where does your will get in the way of being open to God's will?
Finally, if you take a step back and look at the entire passage as a whole, especially the parable Jesus tells, you get a picture of a God who sends many opportunities our way to respond appropriately. I invite you to pause the video again and take some time to think about the ways that God's grace has touched your life, to remind you of God's love and to revive your love for God and for others. As we close, I am reminded, as I was last week, of the words of a song that we've sung in worship. The tenants in the vineyard did their worst. Nevertheless, God sends his best. Let this be our closing prayer together.
Bring your best to our worst. Bring your peace to our pain. God of love, heal your people.